welcome to Therapy Thursdays. We're happy that you're here. Therapy Thursdays is where we bring the therapist to you. I am your host, Marcus Alexander Velasquez, and I'm very happy that you're here with us today. Today's topic is wonderful. I'm actually really looking forward to today's topic. I'm excited to dig deep. I'm excited to learn too. Just because I host this show doesn't mean that I know it all. I'm here as a student, just like you guys. I'm devoted to my mental health every single day, and I want to learn as much as possible because we have one life to live, and I want to live my life to its full potential. So I'm here to learn just like you guys as well. We do start off with a disclaimer. So as always, our disclaimer is that this show is for informational purposes only. You are completely responsible for what you do with the information presented, and myself and all of our guests cannot be held liable for any misuse or misunderstanding of the information presented. Please always consult a trained mental health professional before making any decisions regarding treatment of yourself and others. So for those of us who joined last week, I appreciate you joining last week and for being here today. You will remember this wonderful woman from last week. We have joining us today, Miss Ro Bernardini. Ro, welcome back. This is your second time being here, so thank you for being here.
I enjoyed it last time, and I hope I will today also.
Awesome. So for those who weren't here last week, can you please give us a little short history about your background, how long you've been in practice, and some of your specialties that you particularly like to focus on? And I actually thought of a new question because I'm interested in this too. In your career, and that's fine if it's an estimate, how many people do you think you have counseled and helped throughout your years?
I did briefly 2 years ago. I figured I did between 7,000 and 8,000 people over the course of my career.
Wow. Amazing.
It was very gratifying.
Awesome. So yeah, please let us know how long you've been in practice and any areas that you specialize in.
Hey, Doke. Hi, I'm Ro, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Chicago, and I do podcasts with this fine gentleman. And I have been in practice for 20 plus some years. I got a master's degree in clinical social work from Smith College School for Social Work, and for 15 years, I was on the board of the International Council on Alcoholism and Addictions in Lausanne, Switzerland. And that was really a great learning experience for me in 100 different ways. I started out specializing in eating disorders when I first started my practice because I have one. That makes it more interesting. And people in therapy, why are you a therapist? Because I needed it, like most people. We need to do this work, and we need to do our own work. So I started working with a lot of people with eating disorders, bulimia, which is having your cake and not eating it too. I thought that one up.
Nice.
Bulimia is where people stuff themselves and then make themselves vomit or use laxatives, or there's a number of different kinds of bulimia, but I'll go into that later. And that I started realizing that most of the people who had eating disorders were post-traumatic stress disorder, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, war, lots of different kind of traumas, automobile accidents, mostly I just started that one. So I will morph on to the others. They start with the family, surprisingly. Some of it is, for some people, is genetic. Most people who have addiction of one form or another have a core underlying depression, which generally comes from, but not always, from PTSD, but it also can come from improper emotional bonding, which means like the first 3 years of life, the parenting just wasn't appropriate or kindly enough or consistent enough. The first 3 years of life really determine a person's life in so many ways. So that was one start. And So I started seeing people with all these traumas. So then I began turning my focus to what else was going on in these people's lives. Most people who have addictions, not all, but most, come from families that are very controlling. My way or the highway. You know, you do it my way or else you're in trouble. And very rigid, controlling families. This leaves people to feel no sense of self-will or self-direction, makes them feel like they live in prison. Mentally, this isn't conscious to them, but it's just sort of part of their being. You know, if someone says, if the commandant says you better make your bed, you better make your bed, because they'll be free to pay if you don't, or at least great disapproval. Disapproval. And people who have addictions are people who have great self-doubt. Am I doing the right thing? Am I not doing the right thing? What is the right thing? A lot of self-doubt. So they feel inadequate compared to other people. Then push forward. I say to people, if you don't discipline your kids gently and appropriate when they're little, wait till they become teenagers. You ain't seen nothing yet. Because teenagers are all hormones and aggression and whatever, but it all comes out again in teenage years, the rebellion from the control. And now the less control and more appropriate parenting, the less rebellion. You don't have anything to rebel against, you don't rebel. So that's kind of a key thing. Anorexia, which I worked with, thankfully patients I worked with died, but people do die from it. They also die from bulimia because their electrolytes get out of balance, they charge a heart attack and die. Anorexics have so much long-term anorexics have such internalized organ damage that they can get into a mild car accident and not recover and die because they're so, I mean, it's very serious stuff. People do die from these things.
Yeah.
As well as, sorry, go ahead.
No, so I just wanted to bring it to the topic at hand today about addictions and compulsions. So I did some research on this, and those two terms are very closely related. Sometimes some people use them as interchangeable, but they're not. They shouldn't be. They are actually two different words to describe two different things. So can you help us understand the difference between addictions and compulsions?
A compulsion is in your head, in your thoughts, you're driven to clean the house or to exercise 80 days a week, or you're driven to do something through obsessional thoughts. Addiction, it's a habituation. It's like you become addicted to the thought and the behavior, but it's not a biological addiction. Addictions are much more biological in nature. For example, when people use drugs, pot or heroin or whatever the drug du jour is, their brain chemistry changes. Alcohol changes the brain chemistry. Cigarette smoking, coffee changes brain chemistry. And when your brain chemistry changes, it becomes more an addiction because there's more physiological component to it than simply a psychological, neurological component. They're both can be very destructive. Addiction tends to be more destructive because people are oftentimes dealing with chemicals that can take their life. And we know in America, and hopefully other places as well, I hope you don't know other places as well, that there's a lot of illegal drugs that now carry fentanyl with them. These drugs supposedly come from China, and they're killing people. I learned of someone today who died of fentanyl, 30 years old, using bought over the internet drug. So it's very common. Unfortunately, it's very sadly common. Compulsion, or I feel compelled to always clean. I feel compelled to mess. I feel compelled to litter. I feel compelled to tear my hair out. I feel compelled to whatever it is. Usually it's some kind of self-torture, cutting. That's a compulsion, but it does have, it's a neurologically stimulated compulsion. self-punishment. What other compulsions are there? Oh, you name it, it's a compulsion. Spending, shopaholism, gambling, spend people who are like thousands of dollars in debt and they just keep shopping. So those are compulsions. Does that kind of differentiate one from the other?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. And then again, in my research, which again, just a reminder for everyone, I am not the licensed therapist. I am not a licensed therapist. That's why we have our wonderful guests on here. So I will be sharing my experience with these different topics, but I leave it to the pros to lead the way. But I did do a little bit of research on it, and I found it interesting that um, I learned that addictions can be almost counterintuitive, meaning that they can go against our normal desires to like protect ourselves, meaning that we will indulge in an addiction that will hurt us or cost us money, or we will abandon sleep or food for these addictions. So I thought that's interesting that an addiction will actually cause you to go
Yeah.
against means of self-protection.
That's called denial. Denial. Oh, I can just use heroin one time and it won't be, addictive. Or I can just drink an extra one more drink and it won't grow into alcoholism. First of all, alcoholism is a self-augmenting behavior, which means that um, if you anyone can become alcoholic if they drink enough alcohol over a long enough period of time. The body will change to be able to begin to absorb alcohol as food. It doesn't want to eat food, it just wants alcohol. That becomes the engine, gasoline to the engine, as it were.
Wow.
And people who, you've heard of cirrhosis of the liver, that's
Mhm.
actually caused by malnutrition, because people who are really heavily into alcoholism don't want to eat, they just want to drink.
Wow.
So
That's great to know. Thank you for sharing that. So my next question for you is, and I always think of our viewers and I always keep them in mind because my assumption is that most of our viewers have not attended formal therapy. So my goal with this show is informing first and foremost, but also I want to demystify and destigmatize therapy. So I want to teach as much as we can on a topic within the 60 minutes that this show goes on. But I want people to at least be intrigued into the world of formal therapy to say, hey, maybe this is something I could benefit from, or maybe this is something for me, because so much misinformation is out there, so much misrepresentation of therapy is out there. So if people are watching this and either for themselves or maybe someone they know that they think they may have an addiction or compulsion, can you let us know what are some symptoms of addictions and compulsions so that people watching this, can question themselves and say, oh man, maybe I have one or two or three of the things she listed, and it can help someone, recognize that they have something that may need help.
well, I had an addiction. It was called pizzaholicism. And I couldn't pass a pizza place without, oh, I got to have pizza or else I don't know, fill in the blank. I'm going to write a book called De-Romancing the Pizza. People with food addictions somehow make it their love. Oh, if I only have a piece of a certain kind of pizza, then my anxiety will go away. Then I won't feel lonely. Then I
Mm,
won't feel depressed. And when you realize that it is not going to make you better, it might make you diabetic, might make you overweight and unhappy and depressed, and it will not cure any of your emotional stresses, then you can begin to get free from it. So you have to de-romanticize whatever the drug is. What if the drug is heroin? Well, let's look at the facts about heroin. It kills people. It's often laced with fentanyl. It takes you away and takes away the quality of your life. It leads you to hepatitis. It leads you to HIV, sharing needles. These are all the danger things that can happen. But if you're so in love with getting that fix, whether that's pot or heroin or whatever, all those reasons go out the window. It might kill me. Oh well, it won't do it this time. It
mm.
might. They say people don't want to use when they die. They just want to use one more time.
Hmm.
So
Wow,
anyway, does
that's
that?
great. Thank you for that. Yeah, no, definitely adds. Just as a reminder for everyone watching, at 7:30 we start to field questions from you guys live, and then either myself, more than likely Ro, will answer your questions. But please prepare yourself to type your questions in the comments at around 7:30, and we'll get into that. I know we already have one question from earlier, which we will definitely get to. So I have another question for you. How do untreated addictions affect the family members of the addicted person?
Well, I remember years ago I was in this international council that I worked on in addiction. I met some people from Sweden, and they were doing a treatment protocol on hospitalizing the entire family of addicts because they said it was a family illness.
Wow.
And to some degree, that's true. Um, it it if you get good parenting and you come up reasonably well, and there's no horrendous things going on, you basically don't become an addict. You may try it, or try alcohol or whatever, not heroin ever, or anything injectable or cocaine, and those things, because they do kill. But if you have nothing to rebel against, you don't rebel. If you don't have pain in your heart for feelings of inadequacy or depression, then you don't feel the need to do that. You just sort of go around your life, you work, you live, you have girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, husband, wife. But people who are in addictive families, oftentimes there's control struggles. Oftentimes, I call it my bicycle theory. Like when parents are married, or when there's a family and there's a marriage conflict, but the conflict is sort of submerged. It gets projected out onto one of the children. I think about a two-wheel bicycle. As long as it's going in sync, it's fine. But if it gets unstable, what do? You put on a training wheel, makes the triangle. And that triangle is usually the addict, the depressive, the person who develops psychosis, the person who's most stressed in the family. So it's kind of a family affair. I have a person who is an alcoholic whose family just kept indulging her. And then because they were fairly well off, and so she lost this job. Okay, well, let's give her some money or whatever, instead of saying, hey, this has got to stop. You're X many years old, support yourself. You're not a kid anymore. But they didn't, because they wanted to be nice and they didn't want her to suffer. Well, they enabled her to be crippled. And it wasn't that they were bad people, because they're good people, but they just didn't know how to handle it differently. And it turns out one of the parents has a bit of an alcohol problem as well. The apple does not fall far from the tree, as they say. Most people with alcoholism, since like the 1950s, before that, it was just alcohol, and in the poorer sections of the city, it may have been harder drugs. But prior to that, people would just, did Granny drink a lot? Or were they a teetotaler? Oftentimes, when there's a drunk in the family, the next generation are what are called teetotalers, which is they don't drink, they curse anybody who does drink, they're goody two-shoes, and then the next generation becomes alcoholic again. There's a strong genetic component to alcoholism. Some people say anyone can become alcoholic given enough alcohol over a long enough period of time. Some people say they're alcoholic the first time they took a drink because their brain just went somewhere, that had never experienced before. And it's an escape from the pain of everyday life. Let's face it, life is not easy. And there's a lot to be painful for, and people pass on, and, job problems, COVID, you name it. People tend to cope with a lot of alcohol or drugs. In America, I've read the statistics that the increase of sales of alcohol during COVID pandemic soared. People were really drinking. Also, most people put on 20 pounds because sitting there porking out, I'll just have some potato chips. That'll make all this misery go away. See, the treatment for, okay, do you want me to go on of addictions, or do you want me to go more into the treatment of them? How would you like to?
Uh, Say that one more time because you broke up.
Okay. Would you like me to talk about what the form of treatment is, or would you like me to go and describe other types of addictions?
Yeah, let's move on to types of treatment for addictions. I think that'd be great because again, like I want to remind our viewers that we're dealing with professionals, licensed therapists. These are people who have studied therapy. These are people who have studied the human mind, who have gone through trial and error of throughout the years of being a therapist. Therapists just become that much better the more people they've seen. Ro admitted that she's seen 7,000 to 8,000 people, which is phenomenal. So, so there are professional resources out there. So, yeah, if you can let us know what are some professional treatment options for addiction, please.
The thing of it is, most depressions, no, most depression, well, that's a slip. Most addictions have an underlying depression, and that is the person doesn't feel it. They just feel this denial, something, most of them talk about feeling numb. Just, I don't have any feelings, I'm just in my head, or I just think too much, or whatever. Treatment means, well, the key to addiction is, I think, sort of like, most people, if they robbed a bank, they'd feel so guilty they wouldn't do it again. Addicts are, well, I'm going to rob a bank until I get caught and have to go to jail and pay the price. There's no free lunch. Everything has a price tag, and it catches up with people sooner or later. Addicts don't change unless they're going to lose someone or something they are not prepared to lose.
Wow.
When they have true pain of their behavior, because they use the addiction, whatever that is, to kill the pain of their behavior. So they don't mind if their parents are tearing their hair out or their husband or wife is, threatening to leave, unless they don't want them to leave. Then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I guess I have to do something about this. If you know that you are, or anybody you know is an addict, my suggestion, if you have no resources for it, is to try a 12-step program. Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, there's Anonymous for everything. Gamblers Anonymous, there's for families of addicts, there's Anonymous. There's for children of alcoholics and addictive family, there's special programs where you go and you meet with people. Since pandemic, most of this is done on Zoom. You don't have to share your identity. You don't have to use your real, email address. And you can get support from all over the world. Some people go to meetings in Denmark. Some people go to meetings in Colorado, just for the heck of it. And some find meetings they like, oh, I like this particular meeting every week at such and such a time, so I'll go to that one. But that's a very inexpensive way to make connection with a network that will help one begin to deal with addiction. The ideal way is the person says, the person I was thinking about recently was parents or family finally said, this has got to stop and you need to do something for your mental health. And the person signed into a program, which I was glad for. But not everybody has that luxury. It depends on where you live, what your insurance coverage is. The law requires in the United States all people to be covered for some degree of alcoholism and drug addiction treatment. There are also, I can't speak to other countries, but there are also programs that are low cost or free run by the state in almost every state in the U.S. If you have any question about it, I would call your physician, although they may not know about it. I would call in the United States, I would call the Betty Ford or Hazelden Center, which is sort of the #1 treatment center in the U.S. And they have branches in Chicago and Minnesota and California and all those places. The rich people don't tend to go there. They tend to go to the ones in California that have yoga classes. I don't know. But that would be a good starting point. I think I've seen mostly with depressed people, well, let me say this. Like they say, 75% of alcoholic people have underlying depression or bipolar disorder, to try to stabilize the ups and downs of their moods. It's all a poor coping mechanism for coping with internal pain. The goal of treatment ultimately is to make one experience pain not so intensely, or some people need medication like antidepressants or something to help bipolar disorder. I don't do that. You have to see an MD psychiatrist for that. But those things can help. But first, get a very good evaluation. If you or someone you know, or you want them to talk to someone, have them call me, have them, call an addiction treatment center in your country of origin, wherever that is. I think that's very helpful. Usually governments, the international organization I worked with, each 92 countries had drug treatment programs available in the world. There may be more now. God knows we have more drug users. So there's going to be someone somewhere in your place, your state, your country, hopefully who'll have some recommendation for you. Most hospitals, certainly in the US, maybe in other countries, have addiction or treatment programs for alcohol, drug addiction. Eating disorders, not so much. It's more of a first world problem, But because if you live in a poor country where everyone's starving, it's not amusing. You don't deny your food. So those are the things that I think of off the top of my head that might be helpful to people. If people want to send me an email and I can give help to them, feel free. I don't know if my email address or not, but.
So that's a great reminder. For those of you watching, please, if you want to connect with either Ro or any of our guest therapists, please go to the link in my bio. When you click on that link, it will bring up several options. The third option down will say Therapy Thursdays. When you click on that link, it will bring you to an online spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet has all the contact information for all of our therapists, their names, phone numbers, email addresses, the name of their practice, where they're located, how much they charge, if they do online therapy, what kind of health insurance they accept, the types of things that they specialize in. So all that information is there. Please click the link in my bio. I think one thing I wanted to focus on is so many words are used probably too casually nowadays, and they may be used in situations that they don't apply, or to people that they don't apply to. And I just saw a comment. Someone said, "This is great information." Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate that. So I think one of those terms, we talked about depression last week, but I think one of those terms is addictions. And people can say, "Oh, well, I'm addicted to so-and-so," but, clinically speaking, they may not be. So how would you advise our audience to be able to tell when something's just a tick or a bad habit, and when it comes to that point where it crosses that barrier and that line into addictive and compulsive behavior?
Is it of danger to you? Do you have control over it? Do you have control of yourself? The Alcoholics Anonymous, they have these 12 steps. And Carl Jung was involved in development of 12 steps, the famous Swiss psychiatrist in the 20s. He and Freud had a thing. Anyway, and he said the person who founded Alcoholics Anonymous, this guy Bill W. from Ohio, was rich, but he was a fall-down drunk. And he went to Switzerland and saw Carl Jung. Dr. Jung said, "Well, I've only seen one or two people recover from alcoholism in my whole life. Most of them die." And he said the one or two had a spiritual awakening. And it's about surrendering control. Now I go back to the first step of the Alcoholics 12-step program, which is became that I had no control over my behavior. No, the alcohol. My life has become unmanageable. Well, do you feel like manageable, or you've lost control over gambling, food, sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever, then maybe you've got a problem and you should seek assistance or at least evaluation. So that would be one. I think if you don't have money or connections, I think the 12-step programs online are very helpful. Maybe people can direct you wherever you live to something more local. So those are thoughts I have.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. For everyone watching, it is now 7:30, so this is when we transition to our question and answer portion of the show. We'll obviously keep talking about this topic, and I still have some questions to keep the conversation going. But this time is dedicated to answering questions. So if you have any questions regarding today's topic, which is addictions and compulsions, or anything therapy related, mental health related, please type your questions in the comments now, and we will answer as many as we can get to within the allotted time. But please, this is your time. We want to answer as many questions as you have. We're here to inform as many people as possible. I do know we had a question towards the beginning of the show. Give me 1 second. I am scrolling there now. All right, so Ro, this question is for you. One of our listeners said, "What are good questions to ask your therapist when looking for help about addiction?"
Well, the good question is, I'm wondering if I'm an addict. I have such and such behavior. I drink too much. I shop too much. That's compulsion, shopaholicism, or hoarding. Those are compulsions. They're not biochemical. Alcohol, drugs become biochemical. There's brain changes that people go through once certain things are entered into their body and system. It changes their brain chemistry, probably for good. Now, when people go into treatment for that change of brain chemistry, and this is addiction, not compulsion, they learn that this pain will not go away. However, if they feel they have some kind of support system, like a 12-step program, a program of some other kind, they can get support to help tolerate the pain. They set up support networks. You can call 24/7 if you feel like you're going to act out and use alcohol or use drugs or whatever. People support each other, and support's very important in recovery. You can't do it alone. See, addictions are a disease of in England they call it disease of choice. They don't call it disease at all. They just call it a choice problem. Different schools of thought. In America, they call it a disease process because your brain has changed, and it has probably forever been altered by use of ingestion of these drugs. That injury to the brain never fully goes away, but one can learn to cope with it. So getting help, however you can do it, please do, because your life may depend on it.
So you did mention a question of, just straight up asking your therapist if they believe you have addictive behavior. That's it. That's straight to the point. But are there any other questions they could potentially ask?
I would ask the therapist what their experience is in treating addictions, if they have any. Because a lot of them will say, "Oh, yeah, I saw a drunk," or that's different than having specified training in an area. If the therapist does not have those academic skills behind them, ask for a referral to someone who could treat them for the addiction problem, or at least evaluate them. Doesn't mean you have to stop with that first therapist, just means that someone else is going to look into a particular part of the problem. Sorry, I didn't answer that originally.
No problem. Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that. We have a comment from Miss Melissa Finley. She was actually our previous guest therapist 2 episodes ago when we discussed anxiety, and I know she'll be back for future shows. We're excited about that. But she left a comment of a great resource, which is aa.org. So you were talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. So for anyone who thinks they may have an issue with alcoholism, that's a great website. That's a great resource, aa.org. So Melissa, thank you for putting in that comment. We have another question, and I think it's hilarious. The reason I think it's hilarious is because literally question number 8 on my list here is almost word for word what they asked. So I think this is perfect timing for this question. So the question is, what do you do for family members that won't even acknowledge that they have a problem?
Well, that's a very good question. A lot of people won't give them the pain of their behavior. You cannot live in this house if you keep doing this. You cannot keep shopping and do this and live in our house. we will not allow this to go on any further. If you want to live somewhere else, that's fine. We can't control your behavior, but we can ask where you're going to live and tell you where you cannot live here if you continue whatever the behavior is. People like the family who's in denial or the patient who's in denial. The family in denial is, there's an organization called Al-Anon. There's also Families of Addiction in the United States. They support each other in dealing with problematic family members. The thing of it is to stop indulging them. It won't go away on its own. It will not just go away because you want it to. People, like I said, when they rob a bank and they have to go to prison, all of a sudden they don't want to be bank robbers anymore. At least I hope so. Although many drug users go back to using drugs and drinking. So I mean, it's tragic actually. But
yeah, and I know that these are very general answers, because I know that we can get into specifics for specific people and their experiences and what it's like with family members. But I think the question, there's a difference of theory and practice, right? So we can talk about therapy in theory, we can talk about technical words and strategies from books, but the real life practical application based on that question is, it's very tough for someone who's in a tough position, who has a friend or a family member that is struggling with an addiction, but hasn't gotten to the point where they actually have admitted that they have an addiction. And sometimes, somebody wants to help. At the same time, they don't want to be an enabler, so they kind of feel stuck. And even though you mentioned it about having to implement boundaries, having to say, oh, if you're going to continue in this behavior, you can't live here. That's great, again, in theory, but in practicality, that can be very tough. Like, this is somebody you love, you may have grown up with, or they're your close family member, and to tell them, like, your issue is so serious that it's affecting our relationship, and, I love you enough to let you know that if you don't change this behavior or make steps towards change, like, I can't be around you. And that's tough. That is a very tough thing to say. Do you have anything to say to that?
I have a friend who passed away not too long ago, therapist, and her son was a drug addict using injectable drugs. And she was stealing money from her to pay for his drugs. She had him arrested and brought to court, charged with theft. And she said it was the hardest thing she ever did. Having her son arrested because he needed professional help, and that was the only thing that would catch his attention.
Wow.
So that's not easy. It is not easy.
Yeah, not at all. One thing I will add to that too is you can never want better for someone than they want for themselves. So you can recognize the behavior, you can see how it's hurting you or that person or other people, and it could be clear as day for you, and you want the best for them. But if they're not on board, if they don't recognize their issues, if they don't want the help, you have to realize that you can have the best of intentions, but the person with the struggle, with the addiction, with the compulsive behavior, they have to want to become better. It cannot be forced upon them. And that's just bringing context to the situation, like real life practical application. If you're dealing with someone like that, they have to be on board. Even if you're like, okay, until you get this, until you figure out what's going on with you, or you recognize it's an issue, I'm going to have to step back, because that might be your only tool to help them, or help them recognize, oh crap, this is an issue because I'm about to lose someone. And the reality is too, somebody may be so deep in their addiction that they, again, being very real, they may choose the addiction over the relationship, which is very hurtful and painful, but that's a sad reality, and we have to be prepared for reality. We may have all the best intentions in the world, but that doesn't mean it's going to have a fairy tale ending and that everybody's going to get healed from their addictions and compulsive behavior. Some people just don't choose to get better, and that is, of course, their choice, but we as those around them have to recognize that we can have all the best intentions in the world, and we still may not, help push them in the right direction. So we do have another, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was
we have another, go ahead.
Just going to say that whatever a person chooses, you have no control over any other person. You can't make them do anything. You can't even bring a horse to water. Forget the drinking part. You cannot
Mm.
make any do anything they do not want to. So let yourself off the hook. Be nice, be kind, but step back if you need to.
Yeah, that can be, it's very true, but can be very difficult, especially for people like empaths driven by empathy and you want to help the world. People have to want to help themselves before anybody else can help them. So, our
Absolutely.
next question says, can someone with a disorder like OCD, can that cause some form of addiction? If so, how can you help them?
Well, biologically, it cannot form some kind of addiction like in the brain. However, if they chose to anesthetize themselves with some kind of brain altering chemical, that could lead to addiction. It isn't as prevalent as someone who just goes to drugs. The OCD is the real problem, not so much, at least until they get into the drugs. The OCD is the first problem. And if you deal with the OCD, the addiction doesn't have to come, although a lot of people will head in that direction because they don't like the pain of it. The OCD, there's a lot of really good medications available to treat it. The person should see a psychiatrist who specializes in OCD, and hopefully that would at least relieve some of the attention. Obsessive compulsive behavior is torturous. It's really torturous, but there is medication for it. So that's the good news.
That's great. Yeah, thank you so much. I hope that answered the question. If not, please put a comment and let us know so we can add some more information. We do have some other comments. Miss Melissa also put another link on there. She says the app AI Anon, or is it Al-Anon, probably for alcoholics, Al-Anon family groups. Download it and you can attend meetings online through that app. That's an excellent resource. Melissa, thank you for doing that. So again, talking about Alcoholics Anonymous, she previously put the link for AA.org, but apparently there's also an app called AL Anon, so short for Alcoholics Anonymous family groups. So it's an app that you can download to your phone and you can attend meetings online through that app. Thank you, Melissa, for that resource. See, I didn't even know that resource existed, so I'm learning as well. I love doing this. Go
Like
ahead.
adult children of alcoholics, that's another one. ACA, adult children of alcoholics, people who grew up in alcoholic families with a history of codependence or just growing up in a disturbed family will make you not be such a happy camper. So those are
Mm,
people who also grew up in very difficult situations. So there's lots of them. There's Narcanon, there's sexual addicts, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, um, lots of different kinds of anonymous.
yep, that's great. Again, if anybody has any more questions or comments, please feel free to type them in the chat. We have about 17 minutes left, but we will definitely keep the conversation going. Ro, my next question for you is, how can a person recognize when they need professional help for their addiction or compulsion?
Is it becoming a problem in your life? Are you losing your girlfriend, your job, your family? Are you getting sick? Are you losing your health? Are you losing your friends? These are all signs. Something's not working right. Something's wrong. And these, like, until you're not prepared to lose someone or something, then you'll seek help when you're not prepared to lose something. But the wake up call is, oh, other people don't like this behavior. This is unacceptable to other people. Well, maybe you need to look at your own behavior and what it's doing that shuns people, that drives people away, or getting fired repeatedly, or, fill in the blank. Breakups, relationship problems. Excuse me, got a little cold.
No problem. Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great point. And that's interesting too, because again, I always want to think of practicality and, you know, the ideal the ideal scenario is if somebody notices that their behavior affects other people, especially people they love, the best case scenario is, interesting. Let me become introspective. Let me actually question my behaviors and what I'm doing because clearly it's affecting other people. That's the ideal scenario. And you know, I love these people and I don't want to hurt them with my behavior. So let me see if there's something I can do.
But
Another very realistic reaction to it is some people saying, forget
oh,
everybody else. I'm going to cut everybody off because this is my life. I'm going to live it how I want to. And they just completely cut people off. So I think that can be another sign of somebody needing professional help with their addiction. If they're constantly cutting people out of their life who don't agree with their life decisions, after a while, the common denominator is the person with the behavior. And obviously, they have the choice to run away from that and deny it as much as possible. Or they can say, you know, enough is enough. I finally recognize that this is bothering me or bothering those around me. And, you know, even though I get rid of my friends and find new friends, or I stay away from family, I keep running into these same issues. These same people keep having the same reactions to my behavior. So this can be an issue. But again, that involves humility. That involves willing to be wrong. That involves self introspection. So you're willing to dig deep and see what your behaviors are, if they are benefiting you and those around you, and if you're willing to get better. Like that's one of that can also be a big thing that fuels addictions and compulsive behavior is pride. The fact
oh,
that like somebody doesn't want to admit their weakness, or I'm fine this and that, and I don't have an issue, you have the issue, not me. And pride can really get in the way, because pride can stop you from admitting the obvious. And it may be obvious to everybody else but you, because either you don't recognize it or you don't want to. And
I
pride
think,
is a very, go ahead, pride is a very real part of this addiction. Go ahead.
well, because pride is the common word for narcissism. Like I tell people, a lot of people with addictive behavior are narcissists. And narcissism is like a split. Part of you feels like you're the king of the world, right, and you're wonderful and you should be a movie star. And the other side of that is you feel like you're dirt. You're never going to be good enough, whatever. And those are false prides. You know, you're not perfect and you're not dirt. You're just a human being with good points, bad points, needs for support, etc. What you were talking about is projection. It's all their fault. I wouldn't do this if that mean boss hadn't fired me. I was so innocent. My friends left me because, well, they have no good taste, or they didn't understand me. It's their fault. Well, guess what? If you keep eliciting these kind of reactions from people, the fault is yours.
Yeah, that's great. And that's the first step towards healing, is admitting that you have a problem, because all the therapy in the world, all the best intentions of friends and family and therapists mean nothing if you're closing your heart and your mind off to receiving that love and that help. So if a person's watching this and they do think that they have addictive behavior, nothing will change until you're ready to change. And it won't. Go ahead.
The first step in the 12-step program is became admitted to myself that I had lost control. I'm not in charge. A false pride.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can see how pride is definitely an issue. We have a comment here that I would like you to respond to. And the comment says, these programs that are available are good, but if the environment isn't changed, the addiction most times return. Please let us know your thoughts on that.
Okay. Usually they say you have to change your playmates, playpens, and playthings. You might have to
Wow.
lose new set of friends, new set of playthings, like maybe you play racquetball instead of use drugs, or you take up running or join a running club. Just you change your playpens, playthings, and what was the other one? Toys, and that's and play friends. Get a new set of friends, and that's what one. If you join a 12-step program, you're going to get a new set of supports with a different worldview, which doesn't circle around shooting up heroin or doing something very self-destructive, whatever that is. So,
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for that. That was a good mnemonic device to remember that too. I appreciate that. Yeah, so again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. We have about 10 minutes left. So I want to ask, how does a therapist help someone heal from an addiction?
By getting down to the core feelings of inadequacy and loneliness. Addiction's a disease of isolation. You're isolated from other people, really, because you're putting on a show, and you're isolated from yourself. So the work of therapy is to help the person first get rid of the drug, whatever that is, so they're feeling the pain, which is not pleasant, but part of the process, and then slowly get them to feel their feelings. I call this like the great trash compactor. You know what a trash compactor is? It's a
Yes.
little appliance that scoots up all your trash and squishes it down. Well, all the feelings that a person who is addictive or depressed has, the trash compactor is all the way down. And slowly, by talking about various feelings and whatnot, the trash compactor loosens up. And the stuff, the feelings that have been all scrunched down, begin to percolate out and let you become free. And it doesn't mean you're going to be free from pain or they won't come back in one way or another, but it helps. It really does work. It really does. It's amazing to me. And
Yeah, that's great. What were you saying? You've done what?
I've done it all these years, but it's still amazing to me.
That's great. That means you're passionate about about what you do. Thank you for what you do. I want to ask because there can always be the possibility of excuses. People can always make any type of excuse to defend their behavior. So I kind of want to help fight against that and kind of remove excuses so people can face their demons and their issues. So I want to ask you, and my intent is so people can become self-reflective and ask themselves this question and these symptoms if they apply to them. So my question is, what if you can name some addictions and compulsions? So I know we know about drug use, alcoholism, but if you can name off as many as you can, but if you can name some addictions and compulsions that may not be as widely known behaviors, and somebody, the goal is that somebody who probably can potentially be like, oh, I didn't know that could be an addiction or a compulsive behavior. Maybe I do need help for that. So would you mind naming some addictions and compulsions?
Trichotillomania. Not heard of it? Nobody's heard of it. It's tearing your hair out. There are people who literally tear their hair out. Agoraphobia. It's a fear of being outside, so they keep themselves inside. What else? I had a person who would tweeze all her eyelashes. Yeah, weird. I mean, well, I've heard a lot of weird things, so it doesn't matter. They're all weird in one way or another, I suppose. And masturbation. Some people who are compulsively masturbating to the point that they damage their bodies,
Wow.
male and female. These are some that I'm just thinking of, sort of the less frequent ones. Sex addiction. Some people are codependent and have love addiction. They got to have a love in their life or else, they're nothing. Well, that's the drug for them. Although it's not a physical drug, it's a person drug that they experience as relieving their internal pain. Bulimorexia, do you know what that is? It's the cross between anorexia and bulimia. There's also exercise bulimia, which is something I used to do. I used to work out 2 hours a day, 7 days a week,
Wow.
which is too much, unless you're, I guess, going to the Olympics or something, but I wasn't. So there's all sorts of things, shopaholic. There's tons of them. I can't think of them at the moment, but just look up addictions and compulsions online and Google it and see what you come up with. There'll be numerous ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to a point that you mentioned earlier that most or a lot of addictions or addictive behaviors have underlying depression to them. So, I often tell people, I came up with this analogy of attacking and healing the disease will heal the symptoms. So what I mean by that is oftentimes people will focus on the symptoms of their issues when the symptoms are being fed and fueled by the actual disease. So by dealing with the disease and healing the disease, the symptoms fade away and take care of themselves. So what I mean by that is like the symptoms are addictive behaviors in, you know, plenty of forms, whatever is someone's forte. But like you said, there's underlying issues to that, which is the real disease. So many people want to attack just the symptoms, so the addictive behavior, and they're like, oh, well, if I just do this, it'll stop. Or you know, whatever, the alcoholic, I'll avoid bars, or somebody addicted to cigarettes, I'll avoid cigarettes or the corner store. So that it doesn't work because the real issue is underneath. So when you solve and you heal the disease, the symptoms take care of themselves. And I think that's a great thing of therapy overall, is that we see kind of the effects of our issues, of our anxiety, of our underlying depression. So we want to change the effects and the outward symptoms of this without realizing that when we dig deep and get to the root cause of our issues, the behaviors will take care of themselves. And again, I struggled with addictions, and that were rooted in childhood traumas. They were rooted in anxiety and depression. So once I healed those things and got a control over the inside stuff, the addictions, you know, kind of got rid of themselves because
you had no need for them.
Correct. I had no need for them. Absolutely right. Yeah, that's great.
They don't understand that when you take away the addiction, whatever that is, drugs, alcohol, sex, rock and roll, whatever, then the person is left facing their feelings, and that's where the healing needs to happen.
Yes, and that can be very, very painful. A slap of reality, a dose of reality for those who may not be prepared for it. So if someone's watching and you believe you may suffer from an addiction or an addictive behavior or compulsions, just be prepared that if you want to get better, healing is available. Find yourself an amazing therapist, someone like Ro, but just be prepared for battle, because you're going to be digging deep. You're going to be digging up old emotions, old traumas, and the majority, if not all the time, therapy can get uglier before it gets prettier. So you have to face the darkness inside of you before you can enjoy the light. And that's coming from somebody who's lived that experience. Go ahead.
Usually it's worse before it gets better. But it does, if you have a good supportive therapist and or medication to, not and or, but and a medication if need be, it's doable. It's doable.
Awesome. Melissa left a comment too. She said, great job. Thank you so much for this time. So thank you to Ro, because you're wonderful and very, very, very informative. We've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. That's why I'm blessed by hosting this show, because I get to learn so much from professionals such as yourself. So I appreciate you being here. We are going to wrap up the show. We have 2 minutes left. If anybody has any last minute comments or questions, please put them in there. As a reminder, if you'd like to get in contact with Ro or any other of our guest therapists, please click the link in my bio. The third option down will say Therapy Thursdays. You'll click on that, which will bring up an online spreadsheet, which has all the contact information for every single one of our licensed therapist guests. So if there's someone that you particularly click with and would like to establish a professional relationship with formal therapy, please do. Therapy is an amazing tool, and we want as many people to take advantage of it as possible. It doesn't mean something's wrong with you or you're messed up or you're crazy. We all have strengths and weaknesses. We can all always get better. The goal is to be better today than we were yesterday. So please click the link in my bio to connect with any of our therapists. I am going to finish up with our disclaimer. As always, our disclaimer is that this show is for informational purposes only. You are completely responsible for what you do with the information presented, and myself and all of our guests cannot be held liable for any misuse or misunderstanding of the information presented. Please always consult a trained mental health professional before making any decisions regarding treatment of yourself and others. So Ro, thank you again for being on the show. We have a few comments here, people saying thank you so much, thank you for the information. So Ro, thank you again for being here. Do you have any final words?
This is my privilege to do this, so I thank you.
Awesome. Well, it is 8 o'clock, so we're going to end on time. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Please join us next week at the same exact time, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, where we will be having another wonderful episode of Therapy Thursdays with our next week guest. So thank you guys for joining in, and we'll see you next week. Have a good night.
Work, work, work. Watch you do my